can go out with a spade and dust your eyes. The eyes are the best tool you have. So looking at physical tests, you could do something like the double spade method where you just dig out a block of soil and you're looking for indicators of good soil health. So things like how far are your roots going down? It's how the soil crumbles together. Is it nice and crumbly, small, round aggregates? Do you have evidence of soil biology? Do you see earthworms, centipedes, or evidence of them like earthworm middens, etc.?
We're in that time of the year between finishing off spraying and the start of harvest. A period when every farmer will be out in the fields assessing crops with an eye to harvest. How close are you looking, and are you asking why a patch is poor or excellent? Soil health is central to those answers. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. If you're enjoying the series, we'd really appreciate it if you could follow the podcast and leave a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. A couple of weeks ago, I visited Johnstown Castle Research Centre Open Day and caught up with researchers about the latest findings. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Fiona Brennan, a senior researcher in soil microbiology, about soil health in tillage systems. I first started by asking Fiona which soil parameters a tillage farmer should be focusing on most.
I suppose tillage farmers probably do more work with soil or have more direct contact with soil than many of the farmers. And probably it's more important for them to pay particular attention to how they're managing soils, because oftentimes it's in tillage soils that problems occur. So the type of things we'd be recommending is, first and foremost, know your soils, know what soils you have on the farm, and particularly if there's ones that are vulnerable to compaction, to keep a particular eye out for those soils if you're doing tilling operations on them. Know what soils you have where and what their capabilities and vulnerabilities are, and manage accordingly. The second thing we'd very much recommend is for people to regularly assess soil for physical, chemical and biological health. And
So just in that, most farmers, tillage farmers, will say they're doing that. They're taking soil tests because they're almost mandated to do it now as much as anything else. And a lot of them are ploughing or they're doing cultivation, and they can tell by the draft and the tractor, oh, it's a bit tough and it's a bit tight. So that must be something going wrong here. And I'll put, it's that kind of way, I think, is a lot of the assessment, but should it be doing a bit more?
Yeah, well, those signs are really important, and tillage farmers are aware of sometimes when things aren't right, but there's also some other specific things they can do. And we'd always recommend going out at least once a year with a spade and have a look at your soil. We give our car an annual service, or we service the combine. Soil is our most important resource on the farm. So it's really important we go out regularly and assess that. And you can do that with very little equipment, very little lab tests. You can go out with a spade and dust your eyes. The eyes are the best tool you have. So looking at physical tests, you could do something like the double spade method where you just dig out a block of soil and you're looking for indicators of good soil health. So things like how far are your roots going down? Are your aggregates, how the soil crumbles together? Is it nice and crumbly, small, round aggregates? Do you have evidence of soil biology? Do you see earthworms, centipedes, or evidence of them like earthworm middens, etc.?
So to a degree, it doesn't, because I think a lot of people are afraid of kind of digging it down and kind of saying, oh, well, I don't really know what I'm looking at, but it's pretty obvious, isn't most of it?
Absolutely. Once you know what you're looking for, and there's some really clear signs that your soil is in good health. And once you get your eye in, it's so easy to actually be able to tell really quickly how good your soil is.
And there's some nice videos online for that. I think you've made a few videos, so people just kind of Google, Fiona Brennan and soil health. They'll probably get those nice videos, and you can and give you a good idea what's going on.
Exactly. And we also have the Farming for Soil Health Handbook, and that's a really good practical guide. Shows you exactly what signs you're looking for good and poor soil indicators. So poor soil indicators would be where your soil is very blocky, hard clumps of soil, almost like concrete. And particularly for tillage farmers, to have a look at their headlands, because those are areas that are often compacted. Try and compare those areas at the side of your field where it's getting most traffic with the centre of the field, and see how, when you go in with a spade, how that soil looks. Are you getting that sort of crumb structure naturally? Are you getting those deep roots? And what colour is your soil as well? Soil carbon is something that tillage farmers in particular, if they're tilling, it's just something they need to keep an eye on, particularly, for example, if they're tillage only and maybe don't have a livestock enterprise associated. It's a bit like you have to pay back into the bank. There's a certain amount of carbon in the bank, but when we remove carbon, we have to put some in some form.
So just in terms of doing that spade test, when is the best time to go at that?
Okay, so probably avoid the height of the summer where the soil is very dry. But September would be a good time. You could also go in the springtime. Any time that there's a bit of moisture in the soil and you've an actively growing plant is probably the best time to go in.
Okay. So then you have a few other kind of things up here. Obviously avoiding physical damage. Most farmers would recognise that in terms of compaction. Not always quite sure that they kind of follow it because time constraints get in and that kind of thing.
Yeah, compaction, I suppose, is our biggest threat to soil health in Ireland. And for the tillage systems, it's probably the biggest problem. The machinery, there's no doubt about it. It's got very high tech, lots of labour saving devices, but it's got very heavy on soil. It's hard on soils. So trying to spread the load of that, having to think every time you go out, do I need to bring this bit of kit out onto the field? Is the soil conditions suitable? Can we spread the load using a trail system instead of a front-loaded system? Can we use more tyres, wider tyres? Play with exactly, all of that. And if you happen to be buying a new machine for your farm, as well as the cost and the other specs, think about what's the axle load going to be on my soil, because as I say, soil is one of your most valuable resources. So making a good decision there would really help. And sometimes there might be a lighter machine in the yard, an older machine that you could bring out to do a job when the soil conditions aren't as good. And timing, making sure that when you go out in the field that the soil is dry, and if you're cultivating, that's dry down to cultivation depth.
Okay, and I just coming down here today, I was looking at some of the spring barley crops that are growing down along on the side of the road down towards Bunclody direction, and you can see, and it's a great time of the year maybe to assess some of that compaction. You can see different lines and different barley crops that are perhaps maybe shouldn't be there from rolling and various other different things. So
yeah, I mean, as I say, farmers are very much subject to the weather, and sometimes it's very hard decisions have to be made. But yeah, just think about the damage and how long things are going to take to come back. And if you do see some damage, make sure you try and address that. And it might be just seeing where exactly that damage is, how deep it is, because exactly where it is on the soil profile will change how you respond to that.
Slightly different in terms of the topic, and because I see a bit of cover crops out here behind us that we're demonstrating today. A lot of farmers are sold the premise that cover crops can remediate some of this compaction damage. Do we have any evidence to support that?
So cover crops can help in that you have rooting depths down to different depths, which can break up the soil. And in terms of keeping your soil in good health, they probably can help in terms of the physical movement of roots down through the soil. And also, in some cases, they're attracting earthworms, which are, of course, the ecosystem engineers, as we call them, coming up, and they can really remediate the compaction. If you very severe compaction, it's likely that some of those taproots won't actually get down. You sometimes see them, they go down to a certain time, and then there's a 90-degree angle and they go across. So if you have very serious compaction, cover crops probably aren't going to help you. But in terms of the general maintenance of your soil and keeping it before it gets to that stage, they probably could have a role. And of course, they're very useful for capturing nutrients as well.
And that's the other one, Principle 4 you have up here, and maybe sync to Principle 5 as well. You have supporting soil biodiversity, which I presume cover crops is one of them, but there's other things in there as well.
Yeah, and of course I'm a biologist, so I'm very biased, but I think this is the most important part of soil.
Of course you do.
Yeah, so I mean the soil biodiversity is really the engine of soils. That's what keeps everything going. And I always remind farmers that, you know, even in fertilised crops, more than 50% of your nitrogen, up to 90% is coming from your soil organic matter pool. So it's not an added extra. It's really important for the growth, the health of your crop, but also for structure. It's the glue that keeps your structure together, everything intact. Your organic matter feeds your soil biodiversity. So to enhance your soil biodiversity, what you're trying to do is make sure they have a range of different niches or habitats or food sources below ground. And you're also trying to make sure your physical structure is good. And that really will help biodiversity. In tillage systems where people are cultivating, if you can, try and reduce down the frequency or intensity of tilling operations, because it can damage some of the larger, for example, earthworms. So we're not saying not till, but try and minimise the amount of tillage that you're doing, and that will have a positive effect on soil biodiversity. But trying to get carbon back into your soil is probably one of the most useful things you can do for supporting soil biodiversity.
So the addition of pretty much anything, whether it's straw chopping or whether it's farmyard manure or slurries or anything, is it sludges even?
Yeah. And keeping a living root in the ground as much as possible. Have plants on your ground as for as long as the year as you can. Try and keep that fallow period, or that period where the soil is unvegetated, as minimised as possible, because what we say with the plants is they're like massive solar powered systems. They're powering carbon into the roots, and that's feeding the soil biology. So the crops you plant are really important, and also trying to keep a diversity of those so that you have different carbon sources going into your soil and at different depths in the soil profile, feeding a whole wide range of the soil food web.
So we're back to cover crops again in the middle. And the last one you have here in terms of Principle 6 is maintaining balanced soil fertility. What do you mean by that?
Well, I suppose this is a message that's been going out for a long time, but making sure that you're not overloading the nutrients, one or more nutrients on your farm, testing your soil so you know what you need, not putting out, don't waste a fertilizer. It's expensive, but also can be damaging for the environment. And remember, if your soil is in good health, it's providing some of those nutrients to your crops. So trusting a little bit in the system, that if you build up your soil health, some of those nutrients will be supplied. If you are fertilizing systems, making sure your pH is good is a simple and easy way to try and balance that fertility. But if we put too much of certain nutrients in, for example, you can break the relationship between plants and the microbes. There's symbiotic relationships, things like end fixation or mycorrhizal fungi. So to keep the microbes helping your crop along, try not to oversupply the nutrients because it short circuits the system.
So when you were talking about oversupplying, what are you thinking about? Is it excess of nitrogen with not so much P's and K's, or is it other ways around? Or what are you thinking about?
We have to remember that, I suppose, the crop needs a certain amount of each. So if it's short of phosphorus and you put additional nitrogen on, it mightn't help so much the situation. Or, for example, a situation where you don't have enough water, putting nitrogen on isn't going to help. So you need to think about what the plant needs, and also the wider soil system. So trying to have, I suppose, what the plant needs, but not putting excess on that could be lost to the environment.
Okay, all very good advice. I think that's hopefully most people are following those anyway, but I mean, everyone can always do a little bit better. Fiona, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Fiona for taking time out of the busy day in Johnstown to join me on the podcast. Join me in upcoming episode when I chat to Eddie Casey about cation exchange capacity in soils and why it makes a big difference to nutrient retention and crop performance. So finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.